Welcome to the Radically Genuine podcast. I am Dr. Roger McFillin. In July 2022, the United States launched the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, hailed as a compassionate step forward in mental health crisis response. But beneath this veneer of progress lies a disturbing reality that few are willing to confront. As calls to 988 surge, so do reports of privacy violations and forced psychiatric detentions. What was meant to be a lifeline for those in distress has become a dragnet, funneling vulnerable individuals into a system that may do more harm than good. Today's guest's research reveals a troubling trend. Psychiatric hospitalizations, often traumatic in themselves, are on the rise. But here's the kicker. These interventions, far from preventing suicides, might actually be increasing them. Patients report leaving these facilities more distressed than when they enter and feel deeply violated by the process. Many are prescribed medications with black box warnings known to increase suicidal thoughts and behaviors. In a cruel irony, the very system designed to prevent self-harm may be pushing more people to the brink. As we dive into this explosive topic, we're forced to ask, in our rush to do something about the mental health crisis, have we created a monster? Are we sacrificing our civil liberties, privacy, and even lives on the altar of good intentions? I want to welcome back to the show Rob Wipond, who is a freelance journalist who writes frequently about the interfaces between psychiatry, civil rights, community issues, policing, surveillance and privacy, and social change. His articles have been nominated for 17 magazine and journalism awards. He is the author of Your Consent is Not Required: The Rise in Psychiatric Detentions, Forced Treatment, and Abusive Guardianships. Regarding the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, Rob's been writing extensively on this subject with Mad in America, and really is going to be the focus of our program this afternoon, with interesting, I think, side discussions about, how do we compassionately, scientifically, and ethically respond to people who are in crisis situations and might be experiencing suicidal thinking and emotions. Rob Wipond, welcome back to the Radically Genuine podcast.
All right. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I felt like the last time we talked, we still had hours more to talk about. So it's exciting for me and to get a chance to sit down with you again and explore these issues some more.
Yeah, let's start with updating our listeners on the 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline. Like, what is it? How is it marketed to the general public? And those who choose to use it, generally, what are they expecting?
So 988 was adapted now from the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. They basically took it over. It's an affiliation sort of about 200 semi-independent call centers or around the country that are now part of this. If you call 988, you'll be directed, based on your area code right now. Largely, you'll be directed to one of those call centers and talk to somebody. Could be a volunteer, could be a professional of some kind, trained to just talk with you about whatever you're going through and hopefully provide you some positive feedback or help, or just a sense of connection for 5, 10, 15 minutes is the length of an average call. And then you'll go on with your day. That's sort of the main service that they're ostensibly providing to people. However, they get engaged in all these other things that I've been researching and writing about, which are these enormous privacy invasions, which are growing. So yeah, it's a lot of money's gone into it. The Biden administration's put $1.5 billion over the last couple of years. It was actually brought in during the Trump administration. So both left and right governments tend to be supporting it. It gets a lot of positive publicity. Right now, we're on the sort of anniversary of it. And so there's been a ton of media coverage over the last couple of days, all very celebratory, just talking about this dramatically increasing number of people calling, up to 5 million a year now, and the faster response rates, just covering these really basic things that they're doing and celebrating that. And so far, I have not found a single other news outlet or journalist that's been talking about what I write about and the research behind it, which itself is distressing. And maybe we could explore at some point, what's really going on there.
So on the surface, it sounds very positive. It's an outlet for people who might be really struggling. Someone who's a lifeline maybe can help ground them in that particular moment. Another human being, so they don't feel so alone. When you do dig into the research on completed suicides, that feeling of like emptiness, loneliness, and hopelessness tends to predict suicide. This idea that you are really disconnected from your community and other people. So you would think on the surface that this is a very positive response, where someone has some training and can be a compassionate ear can help somebody get through a maybe real difficult time where otherwise they might have been impulsive. But what is it in reality, though?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is that, right? Like, we need to acknowledge that. I think there's lots of people who say, "Oh, I called the line and I had a nice chat and I felt a little better in my day," and that's great. That's what they're doing. But they advertise themselves as absolutely private and confidential and life-saving. Now, we might hypothesize that some people feel as if the contribution it makes to their lives, that 15-minute call, is quote unquote life-saving, but that's not usually what we think of when we say something's literally life-saving, and they promote it as that all the time, but we don't actually have any evidence of that. There's no study out there that shows, if people call the lifeline, we literally saved their lives. And in fact, there's mounting evidence of the opposite happening for this huge percentage of these callers, huge and growing. And when I say callers, I just want to emphasize that also mean people who are texting and chatting as well, just for the sake of ease. I refer to them all collectively as callers, but more and more people obviously do use their computer in some way or a smartphone to access these lines. So one of my main problems, and there's multiple problems here, but one of the biggest ones that I have is that they engage in call tracing. Now, they still don't have the power to do that directly themselves. What they typically would do is, if they have some concern that a caller may be at risk in the relatively near future, hours, days, it's really unclear in the policy how long ahead they're trying to predict, but I think if you might be at risk in some way of harming yourself or something, then they will contact 911, and 911 has this power to ping people's mobile devices or look up your location through other means. One way or another, is a pretty high rate at which they can find you, your exact location, where you are, down to about 3 meters on an XYZ axis. So it's a pretty effective tracking tool. And then police will come to your door. Sometimes it's, depending on who's available, it could be another first responder, like an ambulance or a fire department, and they will usually talk with you a bit and then take you to a psychiatric hospital or crisis stabilization center of some kind, where you can then be forcibly subjected to a psychiatric evaluation of some kind, detained for anywhere from hours to days to weeks in some cases. People find this very distressing and shocking. The whole process can out them publicly, because the ambulance or the police may have shown up at their workplace or their home, wherever they were when they made this call. And suddenly, if they were talking about something that they thought was private and confidential, well, guess what? Now your whole family knows that you were contacting 988. Well, about what's going on? They're talking with police too, right? All that. It can be very distressing. It's happened for children at school, children, that are calling this line, having this kind of stuff happen. So it's an enormously privacy invasive process, deep sense of betrayal that people experience. And then whatever happens in these psychiatric facilities plays out. You could be literally forcibly detained for weeks on end as a result of this, and potentially forcibly drugged and all the other things that happen, restrained, and these psychiatric hospital, especially when you're being forcibly detained there, is not a pleasant place for a lot of people to be. And I've just talked with a lot of people who've just had some of the most traumatizing experiences of their lives going through this.
Yeah, before we get to those details, let's take it a step back here. And I want to understand what private and confidential actually means, because this is quite nebulous. For me as a clinical psychologist, privacy and confidentiality are the bedrock of my profession. So most of my clients that I work with have to have the freedom to talk about their inner world and their experience, right? Which often includes, I consider, what it would be like to not live anymore, or the steps I could take to escape this pain. That's in itself is not enough for me in any way to violate that privacy and confidentiality and take steps for hospitalization. There would have to be pretty imminent risk to their lives. And what I mean by that is they have to be pretty definitive that they're going to end their life. And this is the last time I'm going to see them. And there's nothing that I can do. And then I'm kind of, in many ways handcuffed. But the overwhelming majority of situations are people that are sitting there in front of me because they want to feel better. And I would imagine the same thing is occurring if somebody is calling one of these hotlines. They don't really want to die. They're actually reaching out for a lifeline. They're reaching out so, they can take a step back from what they're going through. But I've been looking, into some of your work, and in your article that you posted on Mad in America, apparently the data shows that police and EMS interventions on 988 calls quadrupled in the first year. And so that's like contrary to the promises of getting police out of crisis care. So there's a couple things that I want to explore is, where is the line with this privacy and confidentiality? Are those who call, are they really told up front about what the implications are based on what they reveal? And what's driving, this dramatic increase?
Yeah, all great questions. And let's be super clear about this. People are not only uninformed about this, they're being misled. It's very clear. If you try to look at these privacy policies that these call centers have, there's really no cohesiveness to. There's no formal kind of clear national policy for 988 right now. Every call center has its own sort of policy, but a lot of them have none whatsoever. You go to their websites, you search around. When you go through the process, there's some sort of terms of service you click on. It won't really clarify this. And if you see anything about this specifically, it will be, well, if your life is just as you worded it, they'll claim that they're doing what you say you're doing, but they clearly aren't. And that is, they'll say, if your life is in immediate, clear danger, we may call 911, but that's not the policy. If you look at the policy, it's much broader, much vaguer, and it's not a may, it's a will. And all that's happening here is it becomes highly subjective when they're going to call, why they're going to call, and it often has to do with just the level of sort of anxiety the volunteer, the call attendant, whoever's on the other end of the line may have about you. And that's why it's so important, that relationship you're talking about. If you've got a client, well, you're developing a relationship over time. You have a sense of them. If you're dealing with me, oh, Rob, when he gets upset, maybe he gets really animated and talks dramatically, and you'll get used to me going, for God's sakes, I'm going to go out and kill myself right now. And then and you might even get to the point of laughing because that I'm just, upset in the moment. You go, oh, Rob, sit back down here. And like you can develop a relationship with someone over time, and you get a sense of really where they're coming from and how serious that is. And if you start feeling that it is serious, you can explore that with them and feel confident because you've developed that relationship and they feel comfortable with you, right? And that's key, right? And that can take a long time to build those kinds of relationships. And this isn't what's happening on 988. It's random. I'm calling up. I don't know who I'm talking to. They don't know who they're talking to. This is the first time we've ever spoken. If I just say what I just said to you, it's completely out of context now. They think I'm serious. Something very serious can happen as a result, right? And this is what happens. And I use that example precisely because I talk with people who've literally called the line kind of to troll it and make jokes and things like that, and then ended up with the police coming to their door because the person at the other end of the line didn't realize, they were just kind of making a joke. So that, that's an extreme case. I don't think that's happening a lot, but it's indicative, right, of the level of misunderstanding and confusion and vagueness that can kind of drive these sorts of interventions, and you talk about the increase, that's exactly what many of us predicted. The moment we said, you create this line, you get more and more people calling, you have to hire more and more staff, and you're not boosting up mental health services in communities. It's not like you have a ton of places you can refer these people to. Well, all that's going to happen is you're going to have more people who are going to call up with these feelings, because lots of people have them, and the call attendant's going to feel afraid. Well, what can I do for this person? They only have one option of something they can do, and that is call 911.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we do use police in these situations. So what are people going to experience when an officer comes to their home?
Well, this is what's so concerning, because particularly anybody that's from a kind of marginalized community of any kind, racialized community, immigrants, people with difficulty speaking English, lower income, people who, for whatever reason, may be living in neighborhoods or communities where there's already more tension with police in that area. It's very, very risky when this starts playing out for them. And this is one of the ways it most commonly plays out, too, is that a call attendant may say to you, well, listen, you either tell us exactly where you are, and we're going to send the police around, or if you don't, we're going to send the police around anyway. and the average person figures out pretty quick, gee, I think I'd rather the police come thinking that I'm compliant rather than that I'm non-compliant in this situation for safety purposes. And so they agree to give over their name and location. And that becomes now a consenting agreement. In the data, in the statistics now, these are people who supposedly consented to this kind of intervention. It wasn't against their will. So even the data is vastly undercounting how many people are being pressured, coerced, and threatened into these kinds of interventions. So yeah, it's very risky, particularly in racialized communities in America today. And those are the people often who are speaking out against this. And so it's highly distressing that we have those voices not being lifted in the public dialogue right now. I'd say that it is very racist what's happening with 988, that they're promoting it so heavily without at least cautioning and warning people at all times. And as I said, it's not in these privacy policies very clear, and it's not in news media articles about it either. There's this general attitude out there, paternalism in the mental health system. I think that's behind that. Well, we don't want to frighten people from calling, but as a result, people then have these experiences and they're extremely shocked and betrayed.